I would like to welcome to the stage our next panel, who are going to be speaking to what's happening to the NFT market. I am joined today by my panelists, Pablo Rodriguez-Fraile, who is a digital art patron and collector. Please do welcome Pablo to the stage. Amy Whitaker, an associate professor at NYU. And finally, our moderator, Matt Medved, editor-in-chief from NFT Now. Welcome, Matt. And over to you, Matt.
Amazing, amazing. Good morning, good morning. Art Basel Digital Dialogues, how are we doing? Okay, I know it's Basel week, but I need a little more from you. How are we doing? There we go, there we go. I'm Matt Medved, co-founder, CEO, editor-in-chief of Now Media. You may know us for our media brand NFT Now, our digital art fair, The Gateway, which we've done 3 years running with Christie's in Miami and in Seoul, and Sovereignty, our content tool suite for on-chain media. We have an amazing conversation today on the state of the NFT market, which, as Jenny said, is very topical and ever evolving. Even over the past week, I've had to change some of the questions. And so we're gonna tee it off with just a couple with just some quick intros and with our amazing panelists, and then we'll get into it. You want to start, Amy?
Yeah. Hi, I'm Amy Whitaker. I am a professor at NYU. I teach the intersection of art and economics, and I'm really honored to be here. Thanks so much, Jenny, and everyone for inviting us. And to you also, TX.
Yeah, my name is Pablo Rodriguez-Fraile. I'm known as a collector and as a patron of digital art. And I want to thank as well Art Basel and Tags for really putting this together. I think it's a very important conversation to be had. So thank you very much for the invitation. And it's great. It's a really honor to be in conversation with you always, Amy, and with my good friend, Matt. So thank you.
Always a pleasure. Very, very excited for this. So, as Jenny said, this is what's happening to the NFT market. That is the title here, and I think it's something that's on many people's minds. As we said, Bitcoin just hit 100K yesterday, but what we've also seen over the past week is many popular NFT collections up double, triple-digit percentages. We've even seen this starting to extend to digital art collections. Rafiq's Winds of Yawanawa doubled overnight in terms of price. So something's happening here, right? And I'd love to hear from your perspective, what is happening here? Are we, as crypto Twitter and the like to say, so back, or what are you seeing in the market?
Well, we're obviously it's very obvious for anybody who looks to a little bit that there's always been a very big correlation between the state of the crypto and the macro economic component into how then that translates into a selection of the works, at least that are blockchain that are living on the blockchain. So it is to be expected, and I expect this trend to continue. But it is very obvious that this is something that will continue to happen. My slightly different take from this is that I am not sure how good this is, even though obviously the sentiment is great. Everybody's of course happy to have a better money associated to what's happening here. It's always a positive thing. But I actually think that we would become a little bit more sustainable as a digital art, let's say, overall ecosystem, if we have a little bit of a further decoupling between the prices of crypto and the actual prices of digital art. It's something that I hope to expect to see in the not so distant future, where we can value some collections much farther than the connection that they had to the crypto.
Yeah. I love that. Amy, I'd love to hear your perspective.
Yeah, and occupational hazard, as someone who teaches, I brought slides, but I actually think I'll do this without the slides, and I'll just answer that question. So I agree with what you're saying, Pablo, about the decoupling of crypto and the NFT art market. I also think within the NFT art market, we're very limited by that language, the same way the last panel was limited by the definition of digital art, that even saying market makes you think that you're not also talking about artist sustainability and cooperation. And to me, what's really at stake in the NFT market right now is the possibility of regrowth, that we had this kind of burning off of a speculative bubble. We had the kind of big trees that withstood the forest fire of that. I mean, the work that you and Desiree do, the work so many people in the room do. and we have this kind of like verdant regrowth. And one of the things that is really top of my mind is resale royalties, creators' equity, and the way in which that has to date, on the one hand, made huge progress. It went from being something people in the traditional market kind of hated, like auction houses felt singled out by having to pay resale royalties. And then they're like, actually, these are fine in NFTs. But I think one of the real challenges is that we have not used elegant financial design for resale royalties. So we have not taken them beyond functioning as a tax or a surcharge to something that has high watermark accounting and a cost basis, which is in fact the way that they were originally designed by the artist contract in 1971 by artist activist movement. So I think there's a really interesting possibility, even though we don't have language for it, to create better scaffolding between these amazing curatorial experiments like Ethereum-backed and others, and places where there are resale royalties or collector's shares or a lot of financial experimentation, and how to think structurally about the design of that experimentation. So when I think about the market, I think about myself as a kid and how much I loved The Price is Right, and how much in like 1985 I could still tell you how to play Plinko and how to price US household goods. But now, as someone who teaches art markets, I'm actually incredibly bad at telling you the price of a work of art. And it's partly that I don't care. And sometimes I know and I do care. Like I heard things at the fair yesterday where the price had a symbolic value that was important to me to hear. And if I were spending $650,000 on a charcoal drawing, I would have bought a Robert Longo for my brother. But for the most part, it's the structure I care about. And I say that knowing that Notre Dame reopens in Paris tomorrow, that these are cathedral businesses of our time. That the stuff that interests me is not what does that whole building cost, but what are the bricks that people are putting down to build the cathedrals of our time. And what's so inspiring about this session is that there are cathedral builders in this room, and the conversation, these are things that can only be collectively solved by everyone in the field. But resale royalties, restructuring those to be more financially elegant is the number one thing that is on my mind about the NFT market.
Makes a lot of sense. No, I love that. I love that. And I think you make a great point on language. One thing I've said before is that one of the reasons I know that we're still early is that people talk about NFTs as a category when NFTs are really just a medium that transcend all categories. And, we talk about digital art. Digital art has existed for decades prior to, the advent of blockchain technology. But there is this real new movement that exists with on-chain digital art that's brought a whole new, collector base to the table. It has enabled digital artists to create their own collector bases as well, and move from doing client work to being able to be collected within, on this medium based on kind of their own creative visions. And it's been interesting to see just like all of these new faces at the table. And so I'm curious from your perspectives, where are we in terms of like the traditional art world's embrace of that new movement? It feels like we've made progress. I mean, we're here today, right, at Art Basel Digital Dialogues, but there's obviously still a long way to go. So I'm curious, like, what is your outlook there?
Well, again, it's a question that has many avenues of how to answer this. But I actually think that I'm very happy with the progress that we've seen so far in the last few years, and I do believe that certainly, even though digital art has certainly been here for a very long time, I do think that there was a catalytic moment that happened when NFTs really started to show into the space, because it allowed for a creation of a market and distribution that simply wasn't that easy before, and I think it was a much more inclusive way. Outside of just in the market, though, I think that we're seeing a huge progress in the institutionalization of many of these works, and of bringing a lot of a much bigger audience into appreciation of digital and dynamic art in different ways. I still think that we need to work a lot more on embracing both sides that are currently are a little bit separated from each other, and embracing the good things from both sides, rather than saying, this all side is all not good. This all side is all the new and the good. And I think that we need to get the best from both worlds to make it more inclusive. But I am hoping to see it even more prevalent everywhere, not only in our Basel, but everywhere around the world, where digital art is just categorized as art and as part of the art movement that we all so much enjoy.
Yeah, no, I really agree with everything that you said. I think we still have this fundamental dilemma about how art and money go together that really kind of hits a nerve in this space, right? It's like, can everything be reduced to financial value, or is artistic value always separate and transcendent? And all these situations where something's really about money, but people are only talking about art, and NFTs kind of calling the bluff on that because they come with price tags. And I think, for all of us, like there's great dignity to being able to talk about art and money at the same time. I worked for a large investment firm for a hot second in the mid-2000s, but I had a broker-dealer license and all of that. And I remember that I shared an office with someone who had an MFA in acting, and she and I were like, wow, we went to work for like a capitalist firm. But actually, when people came in, the performance of the funds was so obvious that the conversations were really human. They were about character and trust. And I think we might see that in the NFT space because we see people we work with who are whose integrity and thoughtfulness and imagination are all really present. But I think that NFTs still have this reputation as being kind of insufferable. There's a way people talk about them that's clubby. There is a way that they're hard to understand, and people don't engage in, including saying hey, I don't understand that. I'm not a cryptographer. I do not understand that. And so I think that there's some progress, but if you want to be reminded of how little progress there is, write a grant application to a humanities or arts organization that has the word blockchain in it, and you will quickly draw out what people are really not only judgmental of, but incurious about.
I want to add just a few things because we are talking about the market here today and less so much about the importance of the art behind it. But I think some things structurally need to continue to evolve slightly in order for this to really be accepted and included in the overall ecosystem. I think that we told creatives a false lie, in my opinion, a lie that just because you tokenize something, everything just happens around, and that you can suddenly you not only have to be a creative, but you can market your own work. You have to do all of these things that are typically that creatives generally have partnered up with different either galleries, institutions, or different groups that allow you to happen. No, I'm a big believer that we should be thinking more about how to actually create the right incentive system so that everybody wins together, and these more long-term views of partnership with different groups that can help expand these ideas. And I think this is something that I would like to see more in the coming years. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. It ties into a question I had for you, Amy. In your book, The Story of NFTs, you talked about how the conceptual artists of the 1960s, were kind of motivated and excited about this opportunity to really bypass traditional gatekeepers and the entrenched inequities of the art world. And there was a similar excitement during the advent of the NFT movement in 2021 and the like. Obviously, royalties were a big part of that, like you said, and it seems as though sentiment may have shifted. I'm curious, where is that dream still alive? And is there still an opportunity for artists to create the change they want to see?
Yeah, no, I think it's such an interesting question, and a question now of whether the art ecosystem will be kind of disrupted, quote unquote, not just by artists, but also by collectors, by people who are choosing what to buy. But exactly as you say, Nora Burnett Abrams and I got to write this book, The Story of NFTs, based on a program she hosted that Pablo spoke in at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Denver. And she's now becoming the director of ICA Boston. And we talked about Solowit's wall drawings in the late 1960s and the idea that they were kind of market averse, that they couldn't be sold in a traditional way. And of course, Solowit did all this other collaborative work on artist books and making things that worked outside the market. Those works travel with certificates of authenticity now, which are kind of uncannily similar structurally to NFTs. But the thing that I always think about is this other body of work of Solowitz that are these ripped and torn drawings. They're made out of like old coffee filters, and they're all labeled not to be sold for more than $100, and they're all always sold for more than $100. So what I think we're talking about in a way is what artists' agency and autonomy is. And I used the word dignity before, but I think it's a really important word. Like, what is the sense of dignity where you can define the terms of your work and people will continue to honor them? That's something that gets inculcated in contracts, of course, too, but it's also like, what's the sense of creative safety that people have? And I think about that. You could comment on this more aptly than I could, Pablo, but I think about that also in terms of whether NFTs are a security and whether people are afraid of regulation of them, distinct from the traditional art market. So I think these, just on your question, I think we are in a moment of conceptual experimentation and agency and autonomy, not just of artists, but also of curators, and the kind of definition of terms and how important they are and what that means. And again, the dignity of putting out there what you want the circulation of the work to be as part of the work. So I hope that we're still very much in that experiment, but I don't know how the government feels as a collaborator in that experimentation.
I mean, that's yeah. I'm not sure I have a lot to add to that in particular, but I do think that many or the large majority, at least, of the art-based digital artworks that we're seeing, I would not categorize them as a security. Outside of some of them that are organized in a way for that to be so, but yeah.
Well, Pablo, one thing I'd love to kind of dig in with you on is, obviously you've collected in the traditional art world, prior, to collecting digital art and in the NFT space, and obviously it's a very different relationship there between artists, galleries, collectors, and the like, and part of sort of this, some of the the kind of middlemen, and as it was seen that some digital artists were looking to kind of remove and move beyond sort of like this gatekeeping, was kind of like this gallery system and sort of the entrenched curation systems. I'm curious, like, what is your perspective on that in the current like digital art market? Like, what is the role of a gallery? What can it play in this era? And how do you kind of like reconcile those two forces?
Yeah, so I think there has been a big distinction in particular applies to here, because now when we live in a social world where everybody's connected through social media, and I think this really really changes everything. It is true that there was a little bit of gatekeeping. There still is a little bit of gatekeeping in the more what we call in this field the more traditional contemporary art world, and I do see that the digital has an incredibly powerful way of actually breaking some of these barriers. As we were in a conversation the other day as well, now you can actually see an artist that you like, learn about their practice, and actually send them a message and interact with them and get to know them in a way that just wasn't available before. However, I still think that again, there's a lot of value that either an agent or a gallery or a new form of representation of some kind that can actually help you achieve some of the other things outside of the creative process that I think are very important to have a sustainable long-term career in the creative world. Again, there's always exceptions to this, but I do think and I hope that we start seeing a little bit more of people appreciating that there's that there is some value to be added, while still keeping your independence and the control in your work and in your practice of actually bringing other people to help you again expand your practice into their domains. And I really believe that this is good. But again, the mentality and the structure of how some of these digital creatives think, I think, needs to change, and understand that you need to incentivize all of the parties that are around your practice in order for this to work. Yeah.
Do you have any thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I really agree with that. I think there's so much that we perceive as the lone creative individual that's actually collaborative, and that there are many people who take early creative risk, galleries, collectors, curators, and it's remarkable to me how much of this comes down to the initiative of curious individuals like Megan Doyle, who's the person who fielded the email that led to the initial Beeple sale at Christie's. Like, she's the junior cataloger who got a slot in the sale before Beeple was designated as the artist. And so I think that that's really important. And I just, as a brief personal note, as someone who's a writer, and I think this is related to being an artist, which I have been also by background, is it's strange when you are the locus of vulnerability and also the locus of enthusiasm. Like, you know all the foibles, but you're also the person who has to market the work to the world. And I think if we have artists who do not have gatekeepers, partners, agents, advisors, then you over-index for people who are excellent artists, but also really talented at the promotion part of it. Mm-hmm. And I think that, like, there's a lot of great work that we see, but there's a lot of amazing work that we don't happen to see in that environment. And also, I say this as someone who publishes academic papers, that, like, one of the great pleasures of that, which is like sometimes a kind of grindy process that is for 5 people to read, is that I get to collaborate and I get to think in totally different ways because I'm in a shared mind space and creative space with other people, all of whom think and work in really different ways. So I think it's really important just to the work that's getting made, in addition to the ecosystem.
I think those are great points across the board. Pablo, I want to double down on something you mentioned earlier, because I know that recently you sort of criticized sort of the focus in the space on monetary value at the expense of narratives of cultural significance. You mentioned some projects like CryptoPunks and Squiggles as ones where you saw this to be a bit endemic. I'm curious, like, what's your perspective on that, and what will it take to kind of move beyond that focus on speculation?
First of all, I really respect everybody's reason. I think it's completely valid to participate in any ecosystem however they like. So it wasn't really a negative thing. I just think that when the conversation is solely and uniquely about money, then the type of people that you primarily attract are the people that are interested in this. So you end up having these incredible collections that are very culturally significant, that are unfortunately lost to the ether and to the traders, and like a little bit forgotten. And they're completely, they just go around with again, in this case, because they're so tied to the crypto ecosystem, with the crypto ecosystem. I think that there's a lot of value to be had where you have to choose whether you want to be, your work to be a tradable asset, which again, it's valid if that is what you want, and solely that, or where you want to have a legacy where your work is really transmitted over generations, and have some value there. So I think it's a fine line that again we're still trying to figure out in the digital work. And again, I have nothing. I really respect, and I think it's super interesting, both the Squiggles and the Punks. I just wish that people really sometimes talked about why they're so significant rather than only about what we call here the floor price, and how much they're valued. I think that again, they were catalytic moments that I think are a lot more significant than solely defined by the value that they bring. Yeah.
Amy, did you have any thoughts?
No, I love how you say that, and I wish for all of us, relatedly, to be able to mentally time travel and just remember how those projects entered the world. Like the Punks. I mean, that really came about from exploration and generosity. It was like a work that was given away that only later came to have a lot of financial value. And I think it's really important to remember that before picture all the time.
Yeah, and I'm curious, Amy. Obviously, you've written extensively on NFTs and the medium and its potential. Like, what are some of those meaningful use cases that excite you beyond simply speculative value?
I mean, it's really like any case that's a person who is getting to make work that they believe is of value and is getting to invite other people into community about it. Like I have a sort of like a highly democratized sense of taste about NFTs. Like I like for many different people to get to decide what's of value. I like that they're pushing our sense of political imagination about the taste-making apparatus of the art. And I also like learning from platforms like FeralFile that Casey was showing in the last session. Casey's co-founder in FeralFile, Sean Moss-Pultz, who Pablo also knows, is my original introduction to blockchain, like more than 10 years ago. And I feel like they do this amazing kind of work in part because it comes about through curation of people who are kind of deeply in the NFT space, but also collaborations across artists where what I said about co-authoring papers, like the artists are doing that for the shows. So there's this really interesting work that's being made. And every time I make space to kind of go into the rabbit hole of what their programming is, I'm like, I feel kind of nourished by it in a way that I particularly notice, because there's so many ways that we interact with art kind of in our modern society, whether that's in a museum or in an art fair, where it's very hard to kind of slow down and just be with the art. Maybe you're a tourist and I'm a tourist and I feel like I need to see something that's a masterpiece in whatever location I'm traveling to, or I'm in an art fair and I feel like I'm in an art fair, I'm saying hi to people. But to really be confronted by art, and I think that that's happening in that situation. And like, I think it's a really good thing that I don't always like the art that other people like. I think it's great that that's happening. I love that kind of messiness and kind of chaos of all of us discovering things together, and that sign that the work is really in progress.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. One thing we like to say at NetNow Media is, everyone here, all of us, we're all part of the last generations to grow up without digital ownership from day one. So future generations are going to grow up owning things digitally. They're going to own things physically. They're going to kind of appreciate those things for their own unique strengths and appeals. And a lot of the hangups that exist right now around like right-click save or how do I hang it on my wall will probably start to dissipate. We're already seeing this with the younger generations on Roblox and Fortnite and the like. This idea of digital ownership is already a norm. However, we also need to meet the market where it is, right? And Pablo, I know you've been a big vocal advocate of the the intersection of digital and physical in artworks, and I'm curious to hear your perspective on that and why that's important, given the current art market.
Yeah, and again, I think there's always exceptions where, and certainly in the previous panel, it was mentioned that some of the works that are created in this way digitally should solely live on the digital world, and that is all right. But I actually believe that at the end, why are we doing all of this? Why are creatives as well doing all of this? And in my opinion, and this is my point of view, but it's because we want to have a shared experience, a shared journey, a shared, and I believe that there's nothing more powerful than when you're sharing something like this with a physical manifestation with other humans around you as well. Everything just becomes a little bit more meaningful, at least to me. I feel like a lot of the works that are solely live in the digital are very transient. They just pass by, and they sometimes might get a little bit forgotten because they're just not brought to life. Like Desi, my wife and I collect with my wife. And we've been in this journey together. We've been trying to welcome people into this digital ecosystem for a very, very, very long time. And it was really the first time that we started really, really bringing these digital, physical manifestations of these digital works into the way that we live, into how we show it, that really the conversation really sparked with a lot of the people, and we were able to bring so many people together that would really understand it. So I really think that it helps for that moment of asking questions, for understanding part of the work. And again, at the end of the day, we are humans, and as much as everything is being more digitalized, there's nothing that can compare to all being us together and sharing the journey together. So I think that component is very, very important. And there's different very valid ways of bringing physical manifestations. And I encourage digitally native creatives to try multiple ways of doing so. Yeah.
Amy, curious to hear your perspective as well, kind of like the interplay between digital and physical.
Yeah, I've been thinking about this a lot because I feel I'm not a Luddite, but I am overwhelmed with screens in my general life and my own choices of being on a small screen and watching a big screen, whatever it is. And so it's hard for me to fully wrap my mind around living in a home that has a lot of digital native art, which is something that I think you and Desiree have done so beautifully. I also just want to say the project in New York that many of you probably saw of Rafik Anadol's machine hallucinations at MoMA with a 24-foot screen in the atrium, I think it's one of those remarkable, iconic engagements with art not unlike Olafur Eliasson's weather project at Tate Modern, however, 12, 15 years ago. And and also acknowledge that you're in Desiree's work, Pablo, through RFC Collection to co-donate that to MoMA. It's remarkable that as part of figuring out this digital analog, there's a way that those works exist in public collections, because it was so fun to see people interact with that work. I am interested in ways that things get printed, even in a temporary way. Like if I had a frame in my home that was a standard size and there were NFT issuances that I could experience in the way that's intended through software, through moving image, but I could also print a still of it and I could change that out in my home pretty easily. I personally would be interested in doing that. And that may just be that I'm old-fashioned and you're like, hand that lady a pencil, but I think that just acknowledging that it's a really open area.
Yeah, absolutely. And lovely you mentioned Rafik, because I think it ties well into the next question, which, I think one of the key differences in, if we are indeed on the cusp of a new bull run and bull market, for NFTs and digital art, one of the key differences between now and 2021 or 2020 even is the democratization of access to very powerful generative AI tools, right? And that is going to have a profound impact, is already having a profound impact on the digital art market. And I'm curious, what do you see there? Especially as we kind of, as this continues to advance, I know Claire Silver likes to say that taste is the new skill, because you no longer necessarily need to have the skill to like a painting or the like to be able to create industry standard artwork. I know, Pablo, you've spoken a bit about the importance of narrative here. So curious to hear from each of your perspective, how is this going to change the digital art market?
Well, I'll say two things about AI and art. One is that the same questions about resale royalties are absolutely present. I don't think we're having a conversation that makes sense about who owns AI. I don't think that we're correctly compensating creators and everyone who has populated those algorithms, and these sort of cooperative economic structures where we all own our data and we band together. I think AI doesn't have those. It is privatizing gains, even if they're complicated and interesting organizational structures like OpenAI having a nonprofit where the proceeds of that company will be distributed by a private nonprofit board. I don't think we have enough of a conversation yet. I think creatives need to own shares. And I think for me, there are things that can be piloted in that then have a great impact on like our democratic imaginary, like how we imagine economic structures that serve and uplift more people. That being said, what stands out for me the most on AI and creating work is a paper that was like famous on Twitter for 5 minutes 2 or 3 weeks ago about R&D in the sciences using AI. I don't know if you saw this, but that if you can use AI for lab experiments, you come up with many more solutions, but that there are two things about that study. One is that it only greatly benefits people who are already at the top of their field, that great scientists are able to judge the outputs of the AI much better. So there's a huge barbelling of the performance, but also that their satisfaction went down, that they were 85%, 84% less satisfied with their jobs, because it's not as fun it's like grading papers, like to go through and like, did the AI come up with a good solution here, is very different from being a bench chemist, for example. And I think the same thing is happening in the arts, that if the AI is making images, then you're choosing them, and that's really different. And it also doesn't hold a lot of space for this emergence of things that aren't like combinations of ideas that have happened in the past. So I'm a little bit of a romantic or an idealist, that I think it's important for people to be able to think from scratch, and that good things come from that. That you can be informed by the past. So I think it's great. AI is great. I'm excited for the experimentation. I teach with it. I use it. But I think we have to talk really honestly about the economics, and I think hold space for things that can still be world built without this one kind of like monoculture of science fiction future.
Well, you're incredibly eloquent, and that's I can't add any farther to what you said. But the way that I see it, that I see this, I see AI and many of these other really tool, like exactly as that, as a new tool that is now available to creatives, and it can be very powerful. But I think it's going to play out in a different way to how the first, let's say, positive cycle of this NFT ecosystem happened, where that was the big novelty. But I think that we've actually seen another type of decoupling, not like the one that we were talking about before, but the decoupling from those artists that are utilizing this as a tool and are really, there's a lot of creatives, amazing creatives in the world. In my opinion, it takes a lot more than just being a creative in order to do something successful in the past. So I think that we're going to see those that utilize AI as a proper tool to carry, to tell their story, to tell their message, to express themselves through this tooling. I think are going to continue to do very well. And again, today it's just very easy. Everybody can go and create something, but it takes a lot more to actually, again, take that message that you're trying to do and utilize it as a tool, not as an end to your practice. And I think it's fantastic because it's incredibly inclusive. But I still think that we're going to see a separation between those that are utilizing this in a more comprehensive and deliberate way moving forward. Yeah.
No, great points, great points. I'd love to hear from each of you. Who are some of the artists that are top of mind that you think are really like leveraging the technology to innovate and drive the space forward?
Well, there's so many, and it's really very, very difficult to just highlight, one or two. Well, there's no secret. In particular, if we're talking about AI, obviously, I liked a lot what I've been a big fan of Refik for a very long time. But that's the obvious, the big name, that is already there. But in the last several years, I have really grown a major appreciation for what Sofia Crespo and Entangle others are doing. I think they are really very special, very special in the way that they're utilizing again this tooling to craft their narrative and to tell their stories. I also very much like another artist that's called Anna Rittler that I think might not get some of the attention that she deserves just yet. She certainly will. But the way that she uses AI and the way that she uses the time-based components and nature components into her works that are created through some AI tooling is impressive. And then I could really highlight dozens and dozens of artists that I find incredibly important and interesting. But probably those two at the moment, I have quite an open and soft obsession with them over the last few years. Yeah.
I kind of want to let that stand. I love that.
Yeah, wonderful. Curious, I think that we've all now gone through a pretty brutal bear market, a long and tough bear market for many artists. One where a lot of artists, began to question, like, will what we saw in 2021 ever happen again? Was that a singular moment in time, or will it come back like the crypto cycle does, in this sort of cyclical fashion? I'm curious, like where's your head at? It obviously, as we highlighted at the beginning, things are moving, things are happening, but also having been a veteran now of I think three crypto cycles, no cycle is ever the same, right? So I'm curious, what are you expecting to see?
I actually expecting to see a very different cycle as well this time around. And I actually think that it's going to be, again, it's something I was commenting before, that we have this false narrative that you tokenize something and then everything is just correlated with that and you're just going to sell it for millions, and no matter what you create, it's on the blockchain, so therefore it's valuable. I think that now we have a lot more mature and sophisticated market that is actually highlighting those artists that are, again, able to carry their message, to carry the narrative, to have their identity in a way that, so I actually believe that we're going to see, and unfortunately, this is not what I necessarily what I would like to see, but I think it's what we're going to see, and it's I think how the world works, where we're going to see a lot of the value concentrated on a much more select number of artists that are actually, again, doing that are utilizing these to invest. And I don't expect that just everything, just because again it's tokenized this cycle around or this time around. It's there were many things that happened during it was also the pandemic times. It was the first time that many people were interacting with not only the digital but with the blockchain. And I think that we went through this early hype. Now this obviously bear market, and now we're seeing again a little bit more sophistication and maturation in a way that that will highlight probably only the best. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that idea of will 2021 come back, it reminds me of how we are in fashion. We were like, will parachute pants that were famous in the 80s make a comeback? And I feel like in an ideal world, it doesn't work that way. It's not just this kind of like recycling of what feels like a safe experience of prior success, but the creative frontier of inventing the world. And the thing that I was thinking about that I did actually want to mention that with thanks to Sean Moss-Pultz from Farrell-File and Bitmark for putting me onto this, there's a book that came out that sort of shaped my thinking since Sean and I were talking about this. Maybe people know this book. It's called Boom. It was published by Stripe Press 2 weeks ago. And it's basically about bubbles and how there are two different kinds of bubbles. And this is what I've been thinking about a lot. So the authors are Byrne Hobart and Tobias Huber. And they're basically saying that the first kind of bubble is people who are trying to eke out and extract value and preserve the status quo. And the second kind of bubble is a growth pain of people building the future. And I think that this is probably, I'm curious what you all think, this is probably a combination of the two, right? Like there's some speculation of people who had centralized power and they were like, hey, maybe there's something for me in decentralization. But there's also a lot that, in the example that Sean and I were discussing from the book, the dot-com bubble. Like if you think about the internet when the dot-com bubble happened and then later. So I think what's interesting now is this question that you're raising, Pablo, of whether there'll be concentration on a certain number of names, which of course would be very like the traditional art market, or whether some of the experiments we see, like decentralized autonomous organizations or artist cooperatives, will lead to what we might call more of a Web3 future than a kind of reinforcement of a Web2 future. Because the core idea of this book is that bubbles, although they're messy and difficult and consequential, and sometimes they redistribute wealth in ways that some people might define as socially suboptimal, or they have messy kind of collateral damage sometimes, that they're also forms of rejiggering reality that has been stagnant. And I think that there's a question of the art market and whether the art market is at least stayed, if not stagnant. If we look at the Art Basel market report, the art market's been the same in nominal terms for more than a decade. So I'd like to think it's an inventing the future kind of bubble, and that hopefully people will return to forms of prosperity, but that they may not be like a return to 2021.
Yeah, I'll give you my thoughts there, and then give it up. The dot-com bubble is really interesting that you mentioned that, because it's an analogy I've used to try and contextualize what's happened and what's happening and what's happened. Obviously the dot-com bubble, 99% went to zero, but it also produced some of the biggest tech giants that still define the way that we transact, live, experience the world on the web. I would often say that like judging the viability of like the early NFT of this movement and this technology by like the early NFT collections would be like judging the viability of the internet by looking at Ask Jeeves, right? Like failed sites like pets.com were still directionally accurate in that like people were going to need to transact these things where they're doing it. It's just giants like Amazon came in and did it better and more efficiently. So I am an admitted techno optimist, but I also believe this is about innovating the future. Pablo, if you have any thoughts on that as a final word, I know we're close on time.
Amy was, as usual, incredibly eloquent in the way to see it. I like to think with idealism, but I actually believe that we're going to see some very, very similar things to what we're seeing, again, as you said, in the dot-com bubble. And these are my thoughts. I might be wrong, like I've been in the past, but I do think that we're going to see some concentrations. I've been a major for a very long time, I've been a major proponent and participant in DAOs, and I like the concept and the ideas. However, and very respectfully, I do see some issues that I don't want to get into right now as to viability of the long-term value that they can actually sustain, over time. And I am very hopeful that what you are painting, Amy, happens. It would be extraordinary, but I personally believe that we're going to see a more of a reputation of the dot-com, where it was directionally correct, but at the end, a few winners take all scenario, I think. Yeah.
Well, I believe we are out of time, so give it up for our incredible panelists. Thank you to Art Basel, PayX, and thank you for coming out.